When you steal from a woman who spent 35 years hunting white-collar criminals for a living, you do not just lose your inheritance. You lose your absolute freedom. My phone vibrated at precisely 6:14 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. I was standing in my massive, silent kitchen, waiting for my French press coffee to brew. The screen illuminated with an urgent, encrypted security alert from my private wealth management firm. Transaction alert. Authorized wire transfer of $120,000 cleared. Destination Grand Hotel Villa Cerboloni, Lake Como, Italy. Account ending in 742. I read the notification twice. I set the phone down on the granite island. I did not gasp, I did not drop my coffee mug, I simply closed my eyes and let the absolute, terrifying silence of my kitchen wash over me. I had not been to Italy in over a decade. I had not authorized a wire transfer of that magnitude since my husband passed away. There was exactly one person on this earth who had access to the emergency bypass codes for that specific corporate account. Welcome back to Alpha Mom Stories. This channel is dedicated to the women who spent their entire lives silently building foundations, only to have their toxic, entitled families attempt to burn the house down. If you have ever been underestimated, manipulated, or betrayed by the people you sacrificed everything for, you are in exactly the right place. Drop a comment below and let me know where you are watching from today, and please, hit that subscribe button. You are absolutely going to want to hear how this story ends. To understand the absolute, catastrophic magnitude of the mistake my daughter made, I need to introduce myself properly. My name is Evelyn Mercer. I am 68 years old. Before I retired, I spent 35 years as the chief financial auditor for a massive, multinational tech conglomerate. My entire career consisted of sitting in glass conference rooms, looking across the table at arrogant, highly paid executives, and methodically proving exactly how they had embezzled corporate funds. I did not just read spreadsheets, I hunted anomalies. I cataloged human greed the way a botanist catalogs poisonous plants, with absolute clinical precision. My husband Arthur was a brilliant corporate attorney. When he died of a sudden massive stroke 4 years ago, he left me incredibly comfortable. We had an $8 million estate, a sprawling historic home in a quiet, affluent suburb of Boston, and an ironclad trust. Arthur handled the emotional warmth of our family. I handled the mathematics when he died. The warmth completely left the house, and all I had left were the numbers. We raised 2 children. My son Julian is 42. He is a mid-level investment banker in New York, who possesses all of his father's expensive taste but absolutely none of his father's relentless work ethic. Julian moved away at 25, and over the years his phone calls became entirely transactional. He only called when the market dipped or when he needed a temporary loan to cover a luxury car lease. Then there is my daughter, Chloe. She is 38. Chloe was always entirely different. She spent her entire life desperately seeking validation from anyone who appeared to possess more social status than we did. We gave her a beautiful life, but we were practical, quiet people. We did not care about designer labels or country club memberships. Chloe despised our practicality. She wanted to be a socialite. When Chloe married her husband, David, she didn't just marry him, she aggressively adopted his mother, Beatrice, as her new idol. Beatrice was 71 years old and had elevated the absolute illusion of old money into a competitive sport. She lived in a large, drafty colonial house that her late husband had bought before his business quietly went bankrupt. She kept the house, but she lost all the actual wealth that sustained it. So she filled the massive void with relentless, toxic performance. Beatrice hosted Sunday dinners that looked like they belonged in a lifestyle magazine. She wore vintage Chanel, sipped expensive gin, and spoke with a completely fabricated, upper-crust cadence. Her entire existence was designed to make you feel incredibly guilty for possessing the money she felt she was naturally entitled to spend. And Chloe completely worshipped her. Chloe started calling Beatrice Mama Bea, 2 incredibly painful syllables that effectively slammed a massive iron door on our entire relationship. Every time Chloe said it, it felt like a deliberate, calculated demotion. I watched my daughter pour Beatrice's wine, compliment Beatrice's vintage jewelry, and completely ignore my presence at the dinner table. 4 years ago, when Arthur was in his final days at the hospital, I lived in a terrible plastic chair beside his bed. I did not leave his side for 3 weeks. Chloe came to visit on a Tuesday. She brought a small bouquet of overpriced flowers, held her father's hand for exactly 20 minutes, and then checked her designer watch. Before she left, I pulled a supplementary corporate emergency card from my wallet. It was linked to a dormant LLC Arthur and I had set up years ago for real estate investments. Chloe, I had said, my voice completely exhausted. I cannot leave the hospital. Use this for groceries, gas, whatever you need to keep your house running while David is watching the kids. Do not worry about the amounts. She took the card, she used it 3 times for groceries, and then, after Arthur's funeral, she never returned it. I forgot about it. In the devastating, crushing grief of losing the man I loved, a single piece of plastic completely slipped my mind. I assumed she had shredded it. I assumed that because she was my daughter, she possessed at least a fraction of the moral integrity her father and I had spent decades trying to instill in her. I was wrong. Let's return to the massive silent kitchen. 6:14 a.m. I picked up my phone and dialed my private wealth manager, Richard. Richard had handled my accounts for 20 years. He answered on the second ring. Evelyn, Richard said, his voice incredibly tense. I was just about to call you. The fraud detection algorithms flagged a massive anomaly on the dormant Mercer Holdings LLC account. The $120,000 wire transfer to Lake Como, I confirmed, my voice perfectly steady. Yes, Richard said. But Evelyn, that is just the wire transfer. I am looking at the 30-day ledger. There are 42 additional corporate card transactions. They bypass the standard alerts because they were processed as corporate retreat expenses. Read them to me, Richard, I commanded. I pulled out a yellow legal pad and my heavy, gold Mont Blanc fountain pen. The exact same pen Arthur used to sign his legal briefs. Richard read the numbers. The numbers filled my kitchen, like a devastating chronicle of an entirely different life. $14,000 at a luxury boutique in Milan. $9,000 for private, chartered wooden boat tours on the lake. $22,000 at a Cartier boutique, $6,000 in Michelin-starred dining. $18,000 for first-class international airfare. The travel documents, Richard noted, his keyboard clicking aggressively in the background. They were booked under the names Beatrice Sterling and Chloe Sterling. I stopped writing. I looked at the yellow legal pad. Richard, I said softly, someone with the physical corporate card and the bypass pin authorized this. Evelyn, do you want me to instantly freeze the accounts and file an international fraud report? He asked. Freeze the accounts, I instructed, but do not file the report yet. I need to understand the entire catastrophic architecture of this theft before I burn the building down. I hung up the phone. I looked around my beautiful quiet house. I raised that girl. I paid for her expensive college tuition. I held her when she cried. And she had just mathematically calculated that my life savings were worth a luxury Italian vacation for a woman who treated me like an embarrassing peasant. I did not cry. I did not scream. I took a slow sip of my coffee. The mother completely stepped out of the room, and the chief financial auditor sat down at the table. It was time to go to work. At 8 a.m., I picked up my phone and called Martha. Martha and I had worked together at the conglomerate for 20 years. She was the director of forensic accounting. A brilliant, terrifying woman who could trace a shell corporation through 3 international borders before she finished her morning tea. She had retired 2 years before I did, but her tactical mind was still as sharp as a scalpel. Martha, I said when she answered, I need your laptop, your dual monitors, and your absolute silence. Can you be at my house in 30 minutes? Martha didn't ask a single question. I am on my way. She arrived exactly 28 minutes later. She set up her massive laptop on my kitchen island, connected to my secure Wi-Fi, and cracked her knuckles. Show me the hemorrhage, Evelyn, Martha demanded. I pushed the printed ledger Richard had emailed me across the granite counter. Martha pulled the documents toward her and began to read. Her eyes tracked the massive, escalating numbers exactly the way she used to track corporate embezzlement. This is not a sudden crime of opportunity, Evelyn, Martha said. her finger tracing the dates. This is a calculated, systematic escalation. Look at the timeline. 6 months ago, she tested the waters. A $300 charge at a boutique, then $1,000 at a spa. When you didn't notice the small leaks in the dormant account, she opened the floodgates. Martha typed furiously on her keyboard. She used the corporate card to bypass standard consumer fraud limits. The wire transfer for the villa. She coded it as an international real estate retainer for Mercer Holdings LLC. She knew exactly how to manipulate the system you built. I want to know exactly what she is doing with the money right this second, I said, my voice cold. Martha smiled grimly. Give me 5 minutes. Martha didn't just understand bank ledgers. She understood the psychology of narcissists. She immediately bypassed the financial databases and opened Instagram. I do not use social media, but Martha knew exactly how to navigate it. She found Chloe's public profile in less than 30 seconds. She turned the laptop screen toward me. There it was, a perfectly curated, highly saturated public diary of a luxury life entirely funded by my stolen retirement. The photos were sickening. Beatrice and Chloe, wearing matching designer sunglasses, sipping expensive champagne on a private, polished wooden boat in the middle of Lake Como. Beatrice posing on the massive, sweeping stone balcony of the Grand Hotel Villa Serbelloni, wearing the exact Cartier watch my money had purchased the day before. But the captions were the absolute, devastating twist of the knife. Mama Bea deserves the absolute finest things in life, Chloe had written under a photo of Beatrice holding a massive, expensive shopping bag, celebrating a lifetime of elegance with my favorite woman. Another photo showed Chloe and Beatrice clinking crystal glasses at a Michelin-starred restaurant. 3 generations of strong, independent women, we built this life. It's blessed luxury. They didn't build absolutely anything, I whispered, staring at the screen. I built that life while I was sitting in a hospital chair, watching my husband die. Evelyn, it gets worse, Martha interrupted, her voice suddenly dropping an octave. She clicked away from Instagram and pulled up a deep dive credit report she had just initiated using my social security number. She didn't just steal the corporate card, Evelyn, Martha said, pointing to a massive red flag on the screen. 3 months ago, Chloe applied for a massive, high-yield corporate line of credit in your name. She completely stole your identity to furnish her own house in San Francisco before this trip. The mailing address is hers. The signature on the application is a complete forgery of your name. I felt the air completely leave my lungs. She had forged my signature. Pull the application, I commanded. Martha hacked through the digital red tape and pulled the scanned PDF of the credit application. She magnified the signature line. There it was, Evelyn Mercer, but it wasn't my handwriting. My signature is incredibly angular, sharp, and vertical. The signature on the screen was soft, lupin, and leaned heavily to the right. It was Chloe's handwriting, desperately trying to mimic mine. Look at the co-applicant line, Martha said quietly. I looked. Right below my forged signature was a second signature. Julian Mercer. My daughter had not just forged my name, she had forged my son's name as a co-applicant to artificially boost the corporate credit limit. She had legally implicated both of us in massive federal wire fraud. She signed Julian's name, I stated, the reality finally solidifying into absolute concrete. Martha nodded. She signed everyone, Evelyn. This crosses the line from a civil family dispute into multiple federal felonies. Identity theft, wire fraud, corporate embezzlement. If you hand this to the FBI, she is going to federal prison. Print absolutely everything, Martha, I said, my voice turning to absolute ice. I want every single receipt, every forged document, and every Instagram photo printed in high resolution. While the printer was running aggressively in the background, my phone rang. It was a number I rarely saw outside of major holidays. It was my son, Julian. I held my hand up to Martha, signaling for silence, and answered the phone. Julian, I said smoothly, to what do I owe the pleasure on a Tuesday morning? Mom, Julian said, his voice entirely too warm, entirely too rehearsed. It sounded exactly like the voice he used when he was trying to close a massive investment deal. I have just been thinking about you a lot lately. I am actually flying into Boston this weekend. I want to come over and check on you. When your son calls you out of the blue, you desperately want to believe it is out of love. You want to believe it so badly that you almost ignore the terrifying timing. But I had spent 35 years listening to executives offer me coffee exactly 5 minutes before I found the missing millions. I recognized the cadence of a trap. That is wonderful, Julian, I replied evenly. I would love to see you. Great, he said, pausing slightly. Hey Mom, I know you are getting older and Dad's estate is massive. Have you thought about letting me handle the financial management? Just to take the burden off you. We could sign some power of attorney documents this weekend. Just to be safe. I stared at Martha across the kitchen island. Julian didn't know Chloe was stealing the money. But he had absolutely noticed that Chloe was suddenly living a billionaire lifestyle on Instagram. Julian was a Wall Street banker. He knew David and Chloe didn't have that kind of capital. He had mathematically calculated that Chloe was somehow draining the estate. And instead of warning his mother, he was rushing to Boston to seize control of the remaining assets before Chloe took it all. He didn't want to protect me. He wanted to protect his inheritance. That is a very thoughtful suggestion. Julian, I said, pouring 35 years of corporate negotiation tactics into my voice. We can certainly discuss the estate when you arrive. I hung up the phone. He is coming for the house, Martha stated, already printing Julian's financial records. He is coming for everything, I corrected her. He thinks I am a confused, grieving widow who can't balance her own checkbook. He thinks he can separate me from my assets exactly the way Chloe did. I opened my kitchen drawer and pulled out a fresh box of thick red manila folders. The exact same red folders I used to hand to the FBI when an audit was complete. Martha, I said, setting the folders on the granite island. I am going to host a Sunday dinner. Julian arrived at my house on Saturday afternoon. He parked his leased Porsche in my massive driveway, walked through the front door, and hugged me. It wasn't the warm, genuine embrace of a son who missed his mother. It was the calculated, assessing embrace of a predator, testing the perimeter for weaknesses. He walked into my living room and immediately started looking at the antique furniture, the crown molding, and the expensive art Arthur had collected over 30 years. He looked at my home the way a real estate appraiser looks at a distressed property. The house is looking a little dusty, Mom, Julian commented, running his finger along the mantel. Are you sure you can manage this massive place all by yourself? I have managed multi-billion-dollar corporate ledgers, Julian, I replied evenly, offering him a cup of coffee. I think I can handle a feather duster, he laughed, but the sound was incredibly hollow. He sat down at the kitchen table, took a sip of his coffee, and immediately launched into his prepared pitch. Look, Mom, you are getting older. The estate is worth $8 million. Chloe is completely out of control. She is constantly posting photos from Italy. We don't know what she is doing. I think the safest thing for you right now is to sign over full power of attorney to me. Let me manage the assets. I can protect you from Chloe. I sat across the table from him. I looked at my son. He was incredibly handsome. He had Arthur's strong jawline and my piercing eyes. He looked like the absolute best parts of both of us. But he was sitting across from me, aggressively trying to legally separate me from my own home, solely to protect his own inheritance. You want to protect me from Chloe, I repeated slowly. Julian, you didn't even come back to Boston for the reading of your father's will, because you were busy closing a deal in Manhattan. Julian flinched, the mask cracked for a fraction of a second. That is not fair, Mom. I was protecting my career. Dad would have understood. Your father understood loyalty. I corrected him sharply. He did not understand abandoning your family for a commission. I didn't argue with him anymore. I didn't yell. I simply let him believe he had successfully planted the seed. I told him I would think about the power of attorney documents, and I invited him to attend the Sunday dinner at Beatrice's house the following evening. Chloe and Beatrice were flying back from Italy on Saturday night, and Beatrice was hosting a massive welcome home dinner to show off her expensive souvenirs. Julian eagerly agreed to attend. He thought the dinner would be the perfect opportunity to corner me and force me to sign the documents. He had absolutely no idea what was actually waiting for him. After Julian left my house to check into his hotel, I drove straight to the downtown Boston office of Arthur's longtime estate attorney, Mr. Vance. Mr. Vance's office smelled like expensive leather and old money. A framed photograph of Arthur sat proudly on his mahogany desk. Mr. Vance was a precise, meticulous man who read contracts the way other people read religious texts. I walked into his office carrying the 4 thick red manila folders Martha and I had meticulously prepared. I set them down on his desk the way a prosecutor drops the final murder weapon into evidence. "Evelyn," Mr. Vance said, standing up, "it is wonderful to see you. What are these?" "These, Richard," I said, taking a seat, "are the exact reasons why I am completely executing the moral character clause in Arthur's trust." Mr. Vance sat back down. He put on his reading glasses and opened the first red folder. "When Arthur and I drafted our estate plan 20 years ago, Arthur insisted on including an incredibly rare, highly specific legal clause. Paragraph 14 of the master trust document stated, "Any beneficiary who commits financial misconduct, fraud, or theft against the estate or its executor immediately and permanently forfeits their entire share of the inheritance." I had thought the clause was excessive at the time. Arthur had insisted, "Evelyn," he had said, "I love our children, but I have seen what massive wealth does to entitled people. We need to build a lock they can never break." Mr. Vance spent 45 minutes reading through the red folders. He read the forged credit applications. He analyzed the handwriting expert's verified testimony that Martha had obtained. He reviewed the IP address logs, the wire transfer codes, and the incredibly arrogant Instagram photos of the Italian vacation funded by corporate embezzlement. When he finally finished, Mr. Vance closed the last folder. He took off his reading glasses and looked at me. His expression was completely unreadable, the mark of a true legal professional. "Evelyn," Mr. Vance said quietly, "Arthur would have been completely heartbroken. Arthur would have been prepared." I corrected him smoothly. "And so am I. Is the moral character clause triggered?" "It is beyond triggered, Mr. Vance confirmed, tapping the folders. "The evidence of federal wire fraud and identity theft exceeds the legal threshold by a massive margin. Both Chloe and Julian can be permanently removed as beneficiaries. Julian's forged signature on the credit application legally implicates him, regardless of whether he actually signed it, because he is actively attempting to seize the estate." "Good," I said. "I want the amended estate documents drafted immediately. I am not just disinheriting them, Richard. I am putting the entire $8 million estate into a completely irrevocable trust. The beneficiaries will be a national foundation for historic preservation and a massive animal rescue charity. No family members, no loopholes, absolutely no exceptions." Mr. Vance nodded. He didn't argue. He picked up his pen and began taking rapid notes. "I also want formal cease and desist letters prepared for Chloe, Beatrice, and Julian," I continued, my voice carrying the absolute terrifying authority of a corporate auditor closing a case. "And Richard, I want you to officially file the cybercrime report with the FBI field office in Boston tomorrow morning at 9:00 a.m. I am pursuing full federal prosecution for the identity theft." Mr. Vance stopped writing. He looked up at me. "Evelyn," he said softly, "if I file that report, Chloe will face serious federal prison time. She is your daughter. Once I hand this to the federal authorities, you cannot take it back." She stopped being my daughter the second she mathematically calculated that my life was worth less than a luxury vacation for her mother-in-law. I replied without a single trace of emotion. "File the report, Richard." Mr. Vance drafted the entire packet of legal documents that afternoon. I signed every single page, using Arthur's heavy gold Montblanc fountain pen. The exact same ink, the exact same pen Chloe had used to practice forging my name. I was officially taking my identity back. "When do you want to deliver the documents?" Mr. Vance asked, carefully sealing the finalized trust into a pristine envelope. "Tomorrow evening," I said, standing up, "at Beatrice's house. Sunday dinner. Do you want me to attend?" Mr. Vance offered. I smiled. It was the terrifying cold smile of a woman who had already won the war before the opposing side even realized the battle had started. "I would absolutely love for you to attend, Richard. Be there exactly at 7 p.m. Do not knock, just walk in. Sunday evening, 6:30 p.m. I stood in my massive, quiet bedroom and got dressed. I did not wear a casual sweater. I did not wear practical shoes. I put on the incredibly sharp, tailored charcoal gray suit I used to wear when I was firing corrupt executives. I pinned my hair back perfectly. I looked exactly like a woman walking into a corporate boardroom to execute a hostile takeover. I picked up my leather briefcase. Inside were the 4 thick, red manila folders. I drove the 20 minutes to Beatrice's drafty colonial house in absolute, perfect silence. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't rehearse my speech. I had spent 35 years methodically destroying liars. I knew exactly how to walk into a room. I parked my car on the street. The front walkway was lined with expensive, manicured rose bushes. I walked up the stone path, my heels clicking sharply against the pavement. Each step was measured, each step was deliberate. I opened the front door, without knocking, and stepped inside. The house smelled heavily of expensive roast beef and old gin. Beatrice's signature scent, Evelyn. Darling, you actually made it. Beatrice's fabricated, aristocratic voice echoed from the formal dining room. I walked into the dining room. The performance was absolutely flawless, as always. The massive table was set with fine china, crystal wine glasses, and cloth napkins folded like swans. Beatrice was sitting at the head of the table, wearing a completely absurd, highly expensive silk caftan she had obviously purchased in Italy using my stolen money. Chloe was sitting next to her, looking incredibly tan, heavily filtered, and deeply smug. David, my silent, pathetic son-in-law, was pouring expensive wine. Julian was sitting across from them, aggressively checking his Rolex. Everyone was smiling. Everyone thought they had successfully manipulated the quiet, grieving widow. Everyone thought they had won. "Sit down, Evelyn." Chloe beamed, motioning to the empty chair at the far end of the table. "We have so many amazing stories to tell you about Lake Como." Mama Bia absolutely loved the villa. I did not smile back. I walked to the end of the massive table. I did not sit down. I placed my heavy leather briefcase on the antique mahogany table. The sound of the thick leather hitting the wood echoed loudly through the room, instantly shattering the fabricated, aesthetic atmosphere. Beatrice stopped mid-sip of her gin. Chloe's fake smile slightly faltered. Julian sat up completely straight, suddenly recognizing the terrifying corporate posture of the mother he thought he could easily conquer. At exactly 7 p.m., the front door opened and Mr. Vance walked into the dining room carrying his own briefcase. "Good evening," Mr. Vance said, his voice carrying the absolute, chilling authority of a highly paid corporate attorney. The table went completely, utterly silent, the kind of silence where forks stop mid-air, breathing becomes shallow, and the temperature in the room seems to drop 10 degrees. "Evelyn," Beatrice stammered, her fake aristocratic accent completely slipping. "Who is this man?" "This is a private family dinner. This is Arthur's estate attorney," I announced, my voice cutting through the dining room like a scalpel. "And this is no longer a family dinner, this is an audit." I opened the heavy brass clasps of my leather briefcase. I reached inside and pulled out the 4 thick red manila folders. I walked slowly around the massive antique dining table. I did not say a single word. I simply placed one red folder directly in front of Chloe. I placed one in front of Beatrice. I placed one in front of Julian, and I placed the final folder in front of David. I walked back to my spot at the end of the table and stood perfectly still. "Open them," I commanded. My voice was not loud, it did not need to be. It was the exact tone I had used for 35 years to command rooms full of highly paid, terrified executives. It carried the absolute, undeniable weight of a woman who already knew exactly how the negotiation was going to end. No one moved. The expensive roast beef grew cold on the fine china plates. The crystal wine glasses sat entirely untouched. "Open them," I repeated, my voice dropping an octave. Chloe's hands were visibly shaking as she reached for her red folder. She flipped it open. I watched the fake aesthetic tan completely drain from her face, leaving her looking exactly like a terrified, cornered child. Inside Chloe's folder were the high-resolution prints of the forged corporate credit applications, the verified handwriting expert analysis proving she had forged my signature, the wire transfer codes for the Italian villa, and every single arrogant Instagram photo she had posted, complete with timestamps and location tags. Beatrice opened her folder next, her jaw instantly tightened. Inside her folder were the exact receipts for the luxury Cartier jewelry, the private boat tours, and the Michelin-starred dinners, all billed directly to a fraudulent corporate account under her specific name. Julian quickly opened his folder. He scanned the documents with the speed of an investment banker. He saw the forged co-applicant line on the credit application with his name on it. He saw the printed text messages he had sent Chloe, aggressively conspiring to secure the estate before I could realize what was happening. His face flushed a deep, furious red. David opened his folder. It contained a single piece of paper, a printed text message he had sent to Chloe while they were in Italy. Just make sure Evelyn never sees the bank statements. He closed his eyes in absolute, pathetic defeat. Mr. Vance stepped forward from the doorway. He spoke with the practiced, terrifying calm of a man delivering a legal execution. Each of you currently holds absolute, undeniable evidence of massive financial crimes committed against Evelyn Mercer and Mercer Holdings LLC. Mr. Vance announced. Federal identity theft, massive corporate wire fraud, and active criminal conspiracy. Silence filled Beatrice's immaculate dining room like freezing floodwater. Chloe spoke first. She always spoke first. She had spent her entire life filling silences with aesthetic noise, because she was terrified of what would happen if the room ever actually stayed quiet long enough to evaluate her character. I watched her aggressively cycle through the 5 absolute stages of guilt. I had seen corrupt CEOs do this exact same routine 100 times. Stage 1. The tears. They arrived immediately, practiced, dramatic, and completely devoid of actual remorse. Mom, please, Chloe sobbed, her voice breaking perfectly on cue. I just wanted to do something incredibly nice for Mama Bia. She has had such a hard life. I was going to pay you back. I swear I was. With what, Chloe? I asked, my voice remaining completely flat. Your aesthetic Instagram likes. You stole $120,000 in a single month. Stage 2. The blame. The tears instantly dried up, her face hardened, completely pivoting her strategy. Beatrice pressured me. Chloe shrieked, pointing a manicured finger at the woman she had just spent weeks worshipping. She said you had so much money, and she had absolutely nothing. She made me feel terrible. Beatrice's head snapped toward Chloe. That is an absolute disgusting lie. I had absolutely no idea where the money came from. Your text message on page 3 says, make sure you book the premium villa on your mother's corporate account. Darling, I quoted perfectly from memory. You knew exactly where the money was coming from, Beatrice. Stage 3. The self-pity. Chloe's voice dropped, becoming small and incredibly childish. You always loved Julian more, anyway. You never thought I was enough. You always made me feel like I was stupid because I didn't want to work in a boring corporate office. I paid for your expensive college tuition in cash, I replied coldly. I gave you an incredibly beautiful life. The fact that you chose to spend it trying to impress toxic people is entirely your own failure, not mine. Stage 4. The children, the ultimate desperate weapon of a cornered narcissist. Chloe stood up, slamming her hands on the table. If you do this to me, you will never, ever see your grandchildren again. I will completely cut you off. I looked at her. I didn't even blink. You are using my grandchildren as human shields to protect yourself from federal wire fraud. That is not just pathetic, Chloe. It is mathematically irrelevant to the crime you committed. Stage 5. The threat. Chloe's face twisted into absolute, raw fury, the aesthetic mask completely shattered, revealing the entitled monster underneath. You can't prove I signed it. I will hire a massive legal team. I will destroy you in court. You are just a bitter old widow. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't scream, I simply let the silence hang in the air for a terrible, agonizing second. I am a bitter old widow, I agreed softly, but I am a bitter old widow with an $8 million estate, a certified forensic handwriting analysis, and an attorney who just handed this entire folder to the Federal Bureau of Investigation exactly 12 hours ago. Chloe completely froze. The air left the room. What? Julian choked out, finally speaking. His voice was completely panicked. The cyber fraud report is already filed with the FBI field office in Boston, Mr. Vance confirmed clinically. adjusting his suit jacket. This is no longer a civil family dispute. This is an active federal criminal investigation for corporate embezzlement. Beatrice stood up. She looked completely terrified, realizing that her old money illusion was about to be dragged through a federal courtroom. Evelyn, this is completely insane. You cannot send your own daughter to federal prison over a family vacation. It wasn't a family vacation, Beatrice, I said, my voice dropping to a terrifying register. It was a hostile theft of corporate assets. And when you steal from a woman who spent 35 years hunting white-collar criminals for a living, you do not just lose your inheritance. You lose your absolute freedom. Julian slammed his folder shut and stood up. He wasn't crying. He was furiously trying to calculate how to save himself. Mom, look, Julian pleaded, using his aggressive banker voice. Chloe is completely out of control. I agree, she belongs in jail, but I had absolutely nothing to do with this. She forged my name on that application. You know I didn't sign it. Just give me the power of attorney right now, and I will help you manage the estate to protect us from her. I slowly turned to look at my son, the boy who was actively offering to throw his own sister into federal prison if it meant he could secure his $8 million inheritance. You didn't sign the credit application, Julian, I acknowledged smoothly. But you absolutely knew she was stealing the money. You saw her Instagram posts. You mathematically calculated the drain on my estate. And instead of calling me to warn me, you booked a flight to Boston to aggressively pressure me into signing over my assets before she could finish draining them. Julian flinched. He had been completely caught. You didn't want to protect me, I told him, the final thread of maternal warmth completely severing. You just wanted to be the one holding the massive checkbook. Julian stared at me, his face completely pale. He had spent his entire career in investment banking outsmarting competitors, but he had just walked blindly into a trap set by his own mother. You set me up, Julian whispered, his voice shaking. I simply allowed you to accurately demonstrate your character, Julian, I replied evenly. And your character is exactly as bankrupt as your sister's. Julian spun around, his panic instantly morphing into violent, aggressive rage directed entirely at Chloe. You absolute idiot, he screamed, slamming his hands on the table. You just implicated me in a federal crime because you wanted to play dress-up in Italy. Do you have any idea what this is going to do to my banking license? If the SEC finds out my name is on a fraudulent credit application, my career is completely over. I didn't mean to drag you into it. Chloe shrieked, cowering back in her expensive dining chair. I just needed a second applicant to boost the corporate credit limit. I was going to pay it all back. How? Julian roared, his corporate composure entirely gone. You don't even have a job, Chloe. You are an Instagram influencer with fake followers. You were never going to pay it back. Chloe burst into hysterical tears. She frantically looked around the room, desperately searching for anyone to save her. Her eyes finally landed on Beatrice. Tell them. Chloe begged, pointing at her mother-in-law. Mama Bea, tell them you made me do it. Tell them you told me your house was going into foreclosure. And you needed to keep up appearances for your social club. You said if I didn't get the money, you would be completely ruined. Beatrice gasped, clutching the collar of her expensive silk caftan. Chloe, how dare you? I never said any such thing. You absolutely did. Chloe screamed back, the toxic alliance completely dissolving under the terrifying pressure of federal prosecution. You told me Evelyn was just a boring, quiet widow who would never even notice the money was gone. You manipulated me. I watched them tear each other apart. I did not intervene. I just stood at the end of the table and let the absolute, devastating truth completely flood the room. I reached into my briefcase one more time. I pulled out a single thin gray folder. I tossed it onto the center of the table. It slid across the polished wood and stopped directly in front of David, my silent son-in-law. Chloe is entirely correct about the foreclosure, I announced, my voice slicing through their screaming match. The room went completely silent again. Beatrice stared at the gray folder like it was an active explosive device. Martha, my forensic accountant, didn't just audit my own accounts, I explained smoothly. looking directly at David. She pulled the public financial records on this exact property. Beatrice's colonial house is heavily mortgaged. She is 3 months behind on payments. She has completely maxed out 6 different high-yield credit cards to maintain her aristocratic illusion. She is technically, mathematically bankrupt. David stared at his mother, the color completely drained from his face. "Mom," he asked, his voice cracking, "is that true? Are you losing the house?" Beatrice couldn't look at her son. She stared down at her lap, her hands trembling violently. The old money socialite was completely exposed. Beatrice manipulated Chloe, I continued, offering no mercy to either of them. She aggressively weaponized Chloe's desperate need for social validation. She convinced Chloe to steal $120,000 from my estate, just so Beatrice could post photos of herself on a private boat in Lake Como and pretend she wasn't actually drowning in debt. "I just wanted one last beautiful trip," Beatrice choked out, tears of absolute humiliation streaming down her face. "I wanted to feel like I belonged somewhere beautiful before I lost everything." "Your pain is entirely valid, Beatrice," I said quietly. "But what you chose to do with that pain is a federal crime. And you chose to fund your aesthetic illusion using my stolen retirement." David looked at his mother. Then he slowly turned his head and looked at his wife. David had spent his entire marriage quietly enduring Chloe's toxic obsession with aesthetics. He had worked 80-hour weeks to pay for their apartment, while Chloe aggressively spent money to impress his mother. He thought he was married to a difficult, high-maintenance woman. He had absolutely no idea he was married to a felon. "You stole $120,000, David whispered, staring at Chloe as if he had never seen her before in his life. "You forged your own mother's name to buy my mother a vacation." "David, please," Chloe begged, reaching for his hand. "I did it for us. I did it for our family brand." David physically recoiled from her touch. He stood up from the table so quickly, his chair tipped backward and crashed onto the hardwood floor. "We do not have a brand, Chloe," David said, his voice entirely hollow. "We have a massive pile of debt, and now, we have a federal criminal investigation." He looked at me. For the very first time in his entire life, David looked at me with absolute, undeniable respect. "Evelyn," David said, his voice shaking, "I swear to God I had absolutely no idea where the money came from. She told me her startup marketing business had finally landed a massive client." "I believe you, David," I replied evenly. "Your specific text messages in your red folder completely clear you of any active financial conspiracy. However, you are still legally married to the primary suspect." "Not for long," David stated with absolute finality. He didn't yell, he didn't scream. He simply reached into his pocket, pulled out his car keys, and walked away from the table. "David, where are you going?" Chloe shrieked, stumbling out of her chair and grabbing his arm. "You cannot leave me right now. I need you." "I am going to my sister's house," David said, prying her fingers off his jacket. "And tomorrow morning, I am calling a divorce attorney. I am filing for full custody of the kids to protect them from whatever federal prison sentence you are about to receive. Do not call me." David walked out the front door. The heavy wooden door clicked shut behind him, sealing the absolute destruction of Chloe's entire fake existence. Chloe collapsed onto the floor. She wasn't acting anymore. The aesthetic influencer was completely gone. She was just a terrified, financially ruined criminal sitting in a puddle of her own catastrophic choices. "Mom, please," Chloe sobbed, staring up at me from the floor. "I will do anything. I will work for you. I will pay back every single cent. Just call the FBI. Call them right now and tell them it was a massive misunderstanding. Please." I looked down at the daughter I had raised. "It wasn't a misunderstanding, Chloe," I said, my voice as cold and clear as the ice in my glass. "It was a massive, calculated wire transfer, and in the corporate world, you cannot simply apologize to the auditors after you get caught holding the stolen cash." Julian stared at his sister crying on the floor. He didn't offer her a single shred of comfort. He didn't reach down to help her up. Instead, he straightened his expensive tie, completely adjusted his posture, and turned his entire focus back to me. He was an investment banker. He knew exactly when a stock had completely tanked and he was aggressively trying to divest himself from Chloe's catastrophic failure to save his own portfolio. Mom, Julian said, his voice entirely too calm, completely devoid of any actual family loyalty. Chloe is obviously out of her mind. She committed federal fraud, and she absolutely deserves whatever the FBI does to her. I am not defending her. He stepped slightly closer to me, attempting to use the warm, manipulative tone he had tried to use in my kitchen. But you and I are still a team, right? I am your son. I am the only reliable family you have left. Just sign the power of attorney over to me right now. I will legally isolate you from Chloe's criminal fallout, and I will protect the remaining assets in the estate. I looked at my son. The absolute, breathtaking arrogance required to stand in a room full of federal evidence and still attempt to manipulate the chief auditor, who had just compiled it, was truly staggering. You want to protect the assets, Julian, I repeated softly, crossing my arms over my charcoal gray suit. Exactly, he nodded eagerly. I manage massive portfolios every single day. I know how to protect $8 million. You don't know how to protect absolutely anything, Julian, I corrected him, my voice turning to absolute ice. You don't even know how to protect your own bank account. Julian flinched, the confident banker mask cracked. What is that supposed to mean? Martha is an incredibly thorough forensic accountant, I explained smoothly, letting the absolute terror of that statement wash over him. When she pulled the fraudulent credit application, with your forged signature on it, she naturally ran a comprehensive background check on the co-applicant. Just to be absolutely thorough, I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a single, thin blue folder. I didn't toss it on the table, I held it in my hand. You leased a Porsche you cannot afford, Julian, I recited, staring directly into his panicked eyes. You live in a massive Manhattan penthouse that consumes exactly 85% of your monthly income. You have zero liquid savings. You have maxed out 3 different premium credit cards just to maintain the illusion that you are a top-tier investment banker. Mom, stop, Julian choked out, his face turning a deep, humiliated shade of red. You are drowning in debt, Julian, I continued relentlessly, offering him absolutely no mercy. You are exactly like Beatrice. You built a completely fake, aesthetic life on a foundation of massive, unsustainable credit. And you calculated that when the massive bill finally came due, Arthur's $8 million estate would be your ultimate golden safety net. That is not true. He protested weakly, but his voice was completely shaking. It is mathematically undeniable, I fired back. You didn't fly to Boston to protect me from Chloe. You flew to Boston because you realized Chloe was draining your safety net. You were terrified that if she stole all the money, you would finally have to face the catastrophic consequences of your own financial incompetence. Julian completely collapsed into his chair. He buried his face in his hands. The arrogant investment banker was gone, completely replaced by a terrified 42-year-old boy who had just realized his massive, invisible safety net had been entirely removed. I need the money, Mom, Julian whispered, his voice cracking with genuine panic. If I don't get an injection of capital, my firm is going to fire me. They run routine credit checks on senior brokers. If they see my debt-to-income ratio, they will terminate my license. I will lose absolutely everything. He looked up at me, his eyes pleading. Please, Mom, just give me my half of the inheritance early. Consider it an emergency bailout. I am your son. I looked down at him. I felt a brief, incredibly painful flash of maternal grief. But the grief was immediately replaced by the cold, hard clarity of a woman who had spent her entire life fixing other people's mistakes. I am a mother, Julian, I said quietly. I am not an emergency corporate bailout fund for your fragile ego. I spent 35 years watching executives beg for money to cover up their own massive failures. I didn't bail them out, and I am absolutely not bailing you out. You are going to let me lose my career? He asked, completely stunned by the finality in my voice. I am going to let you face the exact consequences of your own actions, I replied smoothly. If you lose your career, it is because you built it on a complete lie. You traded your integrity for a leased Porsche. While Julian was completely melting down in his chair, Beatrice decided to make one final pathetic attempt to reclaim her shattered territory. The toxic socialite stood up. She smoothed the front of her expensive silk kaftan, desperately trying to project the aristocratic authority that had completely evaporated 10 minutes earlier. "This is absolutely barbaric, Evelyn," Beatrice announced, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You are actively destroying your own children. You are sending your daughter to federal prison, and you are bankrupting your son. You are a monster." I turned slowly to face her. "I am an auditor, Beatrice. The monster is the truth. Well, the truth is going to completely ruin you socially," Beatrice threatened, her voice rising in absolute desperation. "When the country club hears about this, you will be completely blacklisted. I will tell absolutely everyone in our social circle that you are a cruel, vindictive woman who sent her own family to jail over a petty financial dispute. You will be completely isolated." I actually smiled. It was the terrifying, brilliant smile of a woman who was holding the ultimate trump card. "You are going to tell the country club, Beatrice?" I asked softly, taking a slow step toward her. "I absolutely will," she shrieked, thrilled that she had finally found weapon she thought I cared about. "I will ruin your reputation." "That is incredibly fascinating, Beatrice," I replied, my voice echoing through the silent dining room. "Because according to the public financial records Martha pulled yesterday morning, you haven't actually paid your country club dues in exactly 7 months." Beatrice's mouth snapped shut, her eyes widened in absolute, paralyzing horror. "In fact," I continued, projecting my voice so every single person in the room could hear the absolute destruction of her fake empire, "the country club quietly suspended your membership 3 weeks ago. You aren't even allowed in the dining room anymore. The only reason you hosted this massive dinner at your house tonight is because you literally cannot afford to be seen at the club." Beatrice stumbled backward, bumping into the antique mahogany table. The fine china rattled loudly against the wood. "You are a complete fraud, Beatrice," I stated with absolute, undeniable finality. "You manipulated my daughter into committing federal wire fraud just so you could pretend to be a billionaire in Italy for a week, while your actual house is actively being foreclosed on. If you want to talk to the country club about my reputation, you are going to have to do it from the public sidewalk outside the front gates." Beatrice collapsed completely into her chair, her face buried in her hands, openly sobbing as the massive, heavy reality of her absolute social and financial ruin finally crushed her. She was entirely bankrupt, completely isolated, and currently sitting across from a federal witness. Chloe stared at her mother-in-law in absolute disgust, finally realizing that the aristocratic idol she had completely worshipped and committed federal wire fraud to impress was nothing more than a pathetic, indebted fraud. But Chloe was not finished. A true narcissist never stops fighting until the absolute final weapon has been completely dismantled. She turned back to me, her mascara heavily smeared down her face, her aesthetic completely shattered. "David just walked out on me," Chloe screamed, her voice cracking in pure hysterical desperation. "He took the car. I have absolutely nothing. If you send me to federal prison, what is going to happen to my children? What about your grandchildren, Evelyn? You are actively destroying their mother. If you do this, you will absolutely never see them again." I looked at my daughter. The sheer, terrifying manipulation required to use her own children as human shields, after she had actively destroyed their family, was breathtaking. But I had spent my entire career anticipating the desperate moves of cornered criminals. I had already planned for the children. "I am not destroying their mother, Chloe," I replied, my voice perfectly steady, carrying absolutely zero trace of maternal guilt. "You destroyed their mother the second you forged my signature on a federal corporate credit application. You chose a luxury Italian vacation over your own children's stability. You are going to let them grow up in poverty," she wailed, banging her fists against the antique dining table. "David can't afford our lifestyle on his own." "David is not going to have to afford anything on his own," I corrected her smoothly, delivering the absolute final blow to her desperate manipulation. Chloe stopped banging the table. She looked up at me, completely confused. "Yesterday morning, before I even arrived at Mr. Vance's office, I had a very long, highly confidential phone call with David. I revealed, watching the absolute horror dawn on her face. I told him exactly what you had done. I told him the FBI was going to be involved, and I told him to quietly hire the best divorce attorney in Boston before the federal indictment officially dropped. You warned him, Chloe shrieked, completely losing her mind. You conspired with my husband behind my back. I protected my grandchildren, I stated with absolute, terrifying finality. This morning, I officially established a massive, heavily restricted educational trust for both of your children. The trust will completely cover their private school tuition, their college expenses, and their healthcare. It is fully funded. Chloe's eyes widened in desperate, greedy hope. You set up a trust. Mom, please, I can manage it for them while David and I figure this out. You cannot touch a single, solitary cent of it, Chloe, I interrupted, my voice dropping like a heavy steel door. Mr. Vance is the sole executor of the trust. The funds bypass you completely and are paid directly to the educational institutions. You have absolutely zero access to the money. I mathematically engineered it so that you cannot use my grandchildren as a financial hostage ever again. Chloe's mouth opened, but absolutely no sound came out. She was completely, utterly checkmated. She had no husband, no social standing, no access to her children's trust fund, and an active federal criminal investigation waiting for her. Julian, who had been sitting completely silently in his chair, staring at the absolute wreckage of his sister's entire existence, finally found his voice. He looked at me, then looked at Mr. Vance. His investment banker brain was still desperately trying to find the remaining capital. Okay, Julian whispered, his voice trembling as he stared at the red folders. Chloe is completely finished, I understand, she gets nothing, but Mom, Dad left you $8 million. If Chloe is out, what exactly happens to the rest of the estate? I didn't answer him. I simply took a step back from the dining table, crossed my arms and looked at Arthur's estate attorney. Richard, I said softly, I believe we are completely finished with the audit. Would you please read the final verdict? Mr. Vance opened his heavy leather briefcase one final time. He pulled out a crisp, notarized stack of legal documents. Pursuant to paragraph 14 of the Mercer Master Trust, the moral character clause, both Chloe Sterling and Julian Mercer are hereby officially, permanently removed as beneficiaries of the $8 million estate, Mr. Vance announced, his voice absolutely devoid of sympathy. Any individual who attempts to defraud the estate immediately forfeits their entire legal share. Julian's face went completely pale, his investment banker composure completely shattered. You can't do that. I didn't steal the money. I am your son, you are my son, I agreed quietly. But you are not my heir, and unfortunately for both of you, being disinherited is actually the absolute least of your problems tonight. I picked up my briefcase. I snapped the heavy brass clasp shut. The sound echoed through the silent dining room like a final, absolute verdict. I didn't just remove you from the will, I told them, staring directly into the terrified eyes of the children I had raised. I dissolved the entire estate. This afternoon, Mr. Vance officially transferred the entire $8 million into a completely impenetrable, irrevocable charitable trust. The money is legally locked. The beneficiaries are a National Historic Preservation Society and an Animal Rescue Foundation. There is absolutely no family inheritance left. The vault is completely empty. Chloe let out a sound that I can only describe as a dying, hysterical gasp. She physically collapsed back into her chair, her manicured hands covering her face. Without an inheritance, without the estate, and with a massive federal fraud investigation currently sitting on an FBI agent's desk, she had absolutely no money to hire a federal defense attorney. Beatrice looked like she was going to faint. The toxic old money illusion she had built her entire identity around was completely destroyed. She was suddenly looking at the absolute reality that she was going to be subpoenaed in a federal criminal trial over her luxury Italian vacation. You ruined us, Chloe sobbed, her tears finally genuine, fueled entirely by absolute terror. You completely ruined our lives. No, Chloe, I corrected her softly, walking toward the dining room exit. I simply audited your life. You ruined it entirely by yourself. I didn't stay to watch the massive, screaming fallout. I had delivered the documentation. I had executed the corporate restructuring of my family. I had said absolutely everything I needed to say. I turned around and walked out of Beatrice's drafty, toxic house. Mr. Vance walked quietly beside me. The cool evening air felt absolutely incredible. It smelled like wet pavement and autumn leaves. It smelled like absolute, perfect freedom. We walked to our cars in complete silence. Mr. Vance unlocked his Mercedes. He looked across the street at me. "Evelyn," Mr. Vance said, offering a small, respectful nod. "Arthur would be incredibly proud of you tonight, I know." I replied smoothly, opening my car door. "Good night, Richard." The fallout over the next 6 months was completely spectacular. The FBI investigation moved with the terrifying speed of a federal agency handed a perfectly organized, absolute mountain of forensic evidence. Chloe was indicted on multiple federal charges of identity theft and wire fraud. Her husband David immediately filed for divorce to distance himself from the criminal fallout, aggressively seeking full custody of the children to protect them from a mother facing federal prison. Julian flew back to New York the very next morning. He tried to call me 3 times to apologize, desperate to regain access to the trust. I never answered the phone. He is currently working 80-hour weeks at his banking firm, terrified because he no longer has a massive inheritance to fall back on if he fails. Beatrice was forced to sell her drafty colonial house to pay for her own mounting legal fees after being named as a thank you so much for reading. Please share this story if you have ever had to completely dismantle an entitled narcissist to protect your peace, and do not forget to like and subscribe for more stories of absolute justice. I will see you in the next one.